Can you hear me?
This works fine.
Yeah, it works.
Great. My name is Patricia. I will be chairing this session along with Sonka and Alberto. So please feel free to ask any questions, or if you have any concerns, you can contact us. Just a few reminders. Invited talks last 25 plus 5 minutes, or 30, I think we have this for 25 plus 5 minutes. And questions, you can make it on the chat or raising your hand at any time. And afterwards, the talks, well, you have all the times well labeled in your names, I think. So I think we can go now. We are on time. I'm glad to present our invited speaker, Gabriel Lavorato. He obtained his engineering science PhD degree in 2016 at the Balseiro Institute at the National University of Cuyo, Argentina. And it was followed by a postdoctoral position at the Brazilian Center of Research in Physics and a Fulbright visiting scientist scholarship at the University of South Florida in 2018, when he joined the National Scientific and Technical Research Council and National University of La Plata as an assistant researcher. He was awarded at the Instituto Sabato with the Instituto Sabato Prize in 2018 for his contribution to the field of material science and technology, and his current research is focused on the physical chemistry of metal oxide hybrid nanostructures and their technological applications. So I see you can share your screen. Gabriel, welcome, and you have the mic.
Okay, thank you, Patricia, for your kind introduction. And let me also thank the organizers for making possible such an inclusive conference and for the invitation to give this talk. So now I will present some results on hybrid magnetic nanoparticles. So these hybrid magnetic nanoparticles, which have involved in these results people from different institutions in Argentina, in Brazil, and in the US, where I have been working in the last few years. Thanks to the way magnetic particles interact with their surroundings, they can be exploited in several technological applications. For example, they can transform the energy from electromagnetic fields to heat a very localized region of space, and they can be used to manipulate matter remotely by the application of field gradients. And they can also be used to produce contrast in imaging techniques. And when these particles are combined with other compounds, it is also possible to achieve materials with a multifunctional response. And I think a good example of this is the case of iron oxide nanoparticles applied in biomedical applications. As a result of these properties, several commercial and clinical products have been developed in the last years, and various companies are now working on iron oxide particles which have been designed to fulfill particular requirements of certain diagnosis and therapy tools. So just to introduce the subject. I'm sorry, 1 second. Here. A few words to introduce the subject. Compared to bulk materials that are organized into magnetic domains, nanoparticles below a certain size are single domain, and their properties are defined by their volume, the magnetization, and the effective anisotropy. So when the anisotropy energy is similar to the thermal energy, the response of these particles is superparamagnetic, and under DC magnetic fields, we will find no coercivity at temperatures above the blocking temperature. So under AC magnetic fields, the magnetic moment of the particles oscillate, trying to follow the field, and some energy is lost as a consequence of this process, which is released as heat. So two heating mechanisms associated to relaxation processes with different characteristic times are usually considered. An L process, which is effective for particles with low anisotropies and is due to the rotation of the magnetic moment within the nanoparticles, and also a Brown process, where the magnetic moment is fixed at the anisotropy axis, promoting the physical rotation of the nanoparticles, which is more likely to occur for particles with large anisotropies. So according to this simple model that captures the fundamental ideas of magnetic heating, the amount of energy dissipated by the system depends on the synchronization between the field frequency and the effective relaxation times. So these energy mediators are able to heat their surroundings locally in a homogeneous, targeted and localized way. And this can be exploited in several applications, including hyperthermia therapies, but also cryopreservation technologies, drug delivery, and other fields as catalysis or self-healing materials. So as we know, the nanoparticles can be separated from the medium by applying a field gradient. And it was shown that if the particle size is precisely controlled, then high retention fractions can be achieved for low field gradients, which is very useful in magnetic actuation technologies and in environmental applications. So in our group, we are particularly interested in hybrid nanoparticles, which combine various inorganic or organic components in a single nanostructure. So these materials typically require advanced synthesis and characterization tools, and their properties are particularly interesting because they are governed by the interactions between the components, by interface effects, or by the multifunctional nature. And these aspects provide sometimes properties that are not achievable in single-phase materials. So, for example, hybrid nanoparticles can provide competitive magnetophoretic mobilities and very large heating efficiency compared to single particles. But they are also more complex than originally thought. Just a couple of examples of these. We know that metallic iron is oxidated to iron oxide, but it was shown that this chemical reaction is also modulated by the lattice strain produced at the interface between both phases. And this process is size and shape dependent. And in addition, the core shell nanoparticles can stabilize vortex magnetic states, as shown here in the electron holography experiments, that are quite unusual for single-phase particles. So overall, this means that both chemical transformations and magnetic properties can be strongly modulated by interface effects and deserve our attention. So I will organize the talk into two parts. First, I will show some results on iron oxide nanoparticles and polymer hybrids and their applications. And then I will move to the design of magnetic nanoheaters based on core shell inorganic particles. Okay, so in our lab, we prepare different iron oxides by means of organic phase methods, based on the thermal decomposition of organometallic precursors by using different surfactants or solvents. Typically, we obtain oleate capped particles with very good crystallinity and a homogeneous size and shape, as shown here. This method allows us to prepare ferrites which crystallize in a spinel structure and are typically ferrimagnets with tunable magnetic properties according to their composition and size. Just to give you a few examples, by modifying the nature and the amount of the reagents in the synthesis process, we can prepare particles with different shapes, including octahedra, but also cubes or core shell particles with different size and compositions. However, most applications require water dispersible nanoparticles. So to obtain them, the oleate capping can be replaced with hydrophilic molecules or with a silica coating. And a third option consists in adding an amphiphilic ligand to this surface that interdigitates with the oleate capping at the nanoparticle surface. So a convenient way to do this is by using, for example, PMAO, which is a polymer with long hydrocarbon chains that in alkaline media leaves exposed carboxylate entities, which provide electrostatic stability to the colloid. So we were particularly interested in the role of the concentration of the polymer and in the role of the concentration of the oleate capping during the process. So we explored the hydrophilization of 8 nanometer magnetite nanoparticles under conditions. We choose this size to begin this study because this guarantees a zero magnetic remanence at room temperature, and therefore in this way we minimize the effects of magnetic interactions during the process. So it was quite surprising that the hydrophilization method was not successful for every particle batch, and nanoparticles with different purification degrees after the synthesis show different results. And we were able to correlate the packing density of the oleate capping at the surface, which was obtained from thermogravimetric studies. We correlate this packing density to the success of the hydrophilization process. And we found that below a certain packing density, the hydrophilization process is not longer possible, although the particles can be still dispersed in non-polar solvents. So there is an optimum range for the oleate capping to achieve this hydrophilization process. So then we study the nanoparticle polymer assemblies in the TEM, and we found that the hydrophilization still works very well for low polymer densities. But polymer assemblies containing several nanoparticles are still observed both in the TEM and in small angle X-ray scattering experiments. So we wonder if these particles are really aggregated or are individually coated by the polymer. And to answer this, we analyzed some higher magnification and energy filter images, and the results showed that the particles are indeed well separated, and there is some contrast due to sodium around each of the nanoparticles in these assemblies, which sodium is the counter ion of the solution that contains the nanoparticles. So this suggests that the polymer is indeed encapsulating the nanoparticles individually within each assembly of particle and polymer. So at this point, we wonder how these nanoparticle polymer assemblies are affecting the magnetic properties of the colloid. So a first comparison of the apparent magnetic moment and the blocking temperatures of the nanoparticle powder without polymer reveals that the magnetic interactions in the polymer assemblies are indeed much lower as a result of the larger particle separation compared to the powder without polymer. So we also perform ferromagnetic resonance experiments, and the difference between the resonant field in the parallel or perpendicular directions revealed small variations in the anisotropy of this colloid for different polymer concentrations that is slightly higher for lower density of the polymer, and this is probably due to the assemblies formed by a large number of particles in the case of low polymer concentrations. So then we had a picture of the system. We know that the system is formed by several nanoparticles encapsulated in the polymer, and we had a comprehensive characterization of this system, and we know that this system has a good colloidal stability. Just 1 second to change the screen. I don't know if you can see me.
We can see you, but
can
still
see
the
you.
same.
Okay, maybe the image is too heavy. Now we are here, yes. Okay, thank you. So at this point, we have these polymer assemblies well characterized, but with a known magnetic response and a good colloidal stability. And then we wonder if the hydrophobic domains within the polymer and the capping may be used to encapsulate molecules able to provide additional functionality to the material. So we had this idea because some molecules, such as phenylenone, are purely soluble in polar solvents, and are therefore difficult to use in most applications. Under UV radiation, this molecule generates reactive oxygen species, such as singlet oxygen, which can be used, for example, in advanced oxidation processes. So the idea was to prepare a hybrid nanomaterial that able to generate this reactive oxygen species, and that could be magnetically recovered due to the magnetic properties of the nanoparticles. So the problem was that 8 nanometer nanoparticles stabilized by the polymer cannot be separated magnetically with conventional neodymium magnets, because the magnetic force depends on the volume of the particles and is too low to separate them in a reasonable time, at least for the low gradients provided by these magnets. So we decided to use 23 nanometer nanocubes. As shown here, the larger size ensures an efficient separation in a few minutes, and this cubic shape also provides a large surface to load the hydrophobic molecules in the gap between the polymer and the capping. So we characterize the magnetophoretic response to show that the particles can be separated from the solution at different distances from the magnet. And to check our proof of concept, and to demonstrate that the utility of this system, we demonstrate that the hybrid system can be used to photodegrade acid black, which is an organic dye that is a common contaminant of textile industries, indicating that this approach may be an alternative to other advanced oxidation processes that require, for example, much lower pH values. So let me now move to show you some results on magnetic nanoheaters based on core shell inorganic nanoparticles. The heating power of a magnetic colloid under an AC field can be recorded in a calorimetric setup, as shown here, where the specific loss power can be estimated by recording the initial slope in a temperature time curve, as shown here. So to achieve large heating powers, we need a large saturation magnetization and a fine-tuning of the anisotropy and size of our material. Given the sharp dependence of the heating power with an isotropy, many studies have been oriented to control this parameter, but it's difficult to do so while meeting the limits imposed by the applications, such as a certain magnetic field or a certain dispersion medium, or a particular surface capping, composition, or size. So this objective imposes many challenges for material scientists. And for example, some studies are exploring new ways to enhance the heating efficiency, for example, by assembling the particles into chains, or by controlling precisely the shape of the nanoparticles. In addition, most applications require nanoparticles with heating powers that are less sensitive to viscosity or to concentration, and some studies have been also oriented in this line. And iron oxides are probably the most studied material to this end, but it is very common to have multiple iron oxide phases, such as magnetite, margamite, wustite, this implies changes in their physical properties, and the factors that modulate the chemical transformations between them are still quite unexplored, at least for nanomaterials. So in this scenario, I will show 2 brief examples in which we have been working. First, I will comment on the modulation of the heating mechanisms of core shell nanoparticles by tuning the composition and size of the shell material. And then I will summarize some results regarding the chemical stability of magnetite in this kind of structures. So based on the epitaxial growth of spinel ferrites, our approach consisted in producing magnetite cores with a size of 12 nanometers, which were then covered by a zinc cobalt ferrite in a seed-mediated process. We compare several samples by changing the zinc and the cobalt fraction in the shell for a fixed shell thickness of 3 nanometers, and then by changing the shell thickness for a fixed intermediate composition of zinc and cobalt. We knew that the introduction of zinc allows us to tune the magnetization, while the cobalt increases the magnetic anisotropy of this shell ferrite. So we checked the narrow size dispersion by electron microscopy, and this kind of high resolution images confirmed us that there is an epitaxial growth between the both phases. Then we confirmed also the core shell morphology by electron microscopy that nicely evidences a sharp compositional interface between core and shell, as shown in the images here. This means that there is no interdiffusion between core and shell. Then our study followed by measuring the heating power in a calorimetric setup. The curves reveal large heating rates that increase for larger field amplitudes as expected. Then these curves were analyzed for the whole set of samples in 3 different media with increasing viscosity. So we found that intermediate cobalt concentrations or intermediate shell thicknesses provide a maximum heat, which is above 2000 watts per gram of material, under 300 kilohertz and different applied amplitudes. So these obtained values are larger than those of single-phase nanoparticles with similar sizes, and heating powers in hexane and in water are considerably larger than those in the high viscosity medium. And for large viscosities, the low field amplitudes, we would prefer also lower cobalt contents and thinner shells. So to understand these results, we analyze the DC magnetic properties. If we have thin shells and a strong coupling, as it is our case, we can assume a rigid coupling condition, and we can estimate the effective anisotropy of the system from the measured coercivity of the whole nanoparticles. This calculation is in good agreement with the core and shell fractions obtained from electron microscopy and with the reference anisotropies of each phase, and confirms the role of zinc and cobalt in the modulation of the magnetization and anisotropy of the system. So finally, we built a graph of the heating power as a function of the overall anisotropy energy, which takes into account the effects of both the effective anisotropy and the size of the nanoparticles. By doing so, the heating power of the whole set of samples can be shown in a single diagram. Here, the red one is for a medium with large viscosity, and the gray one is in water. So 2 different responses are clearly observed. Samples with large viscosity, with large anisotropy energy, show heating powers that decrease when increasing the viscosity, while samples with low anisotropies show a non-monotonic trend when varying the viscosity. Then we can draw a few ideas from these results. The highlighted part of the diagram corresponds to the region where the anisotropy energy is similar to the magnetostatic interaction energy between the nanoparticles, and so the results can be understood in terms of the ratio between these 2 energies. Then the non-monotonic trend observed for the heating power would be ascribed to a collective behavior promoted by interparticle interactions in this case. And to check this hypothesis, we looked at the arrangement of the nanoparticles placed in the microscope immediately after the application of the field, and we found that one-dimensional chains are much more likely to be observed for samples with lower anisotropies. So 3 regions can be clearly identified according to the anisotropy, the size, and the medium: a collective behavior zone, a viscous mechanism, and a purely magnetic or NEL heating for immobilized particles. So hopefully this general picture could be useful as a guide to design core shell particles with large heating rates while meeting the limitations of different applications. So before ending my talk, I will briefly comment on another result. regarding the chemical stability of magnetite in these core shell structures. So it is known that magnetite nanoparticles gradually transform into maghemite at room temperature, leading to a decrease in the magnetization and in the anisotropy, while the Bergwell transition, which is characteristic of magnetite, is no longer observed after its oxidation to maghemite. So if we oxidize our 12 nanometer magnetite cores for some time, then we will have maghemite in the system, and this will drastically change the optimum size for achieving large heating powers, as shown in the simulations here on the right. This means that our fine-tuning of the size and magnetic properties will be lost due to the oxidation of magnetite. And this is really a problem for applications where in vivo conditions are required. So with this in mind, we wonder if the core shell structure is able to preserve the magnetite cores from oxidation. And to answer this, we aged both cores and core shell samples for 6 months under environmental conditions, and we studied the obtained products. So we noted that after these 6 months, the magnetization temperature curves still exhibit clear Bergwell transition for the core shell sample, which means that we have stoichiometric magnetite in this sample, while the average isomeric shift of the Moss-Bauer spectra of the aged cores indicates that in this case we have 55% of maghemite. So this, to interpret this result, we analyze the oxidation of magnetite to maghemite, which is a process limited by the cation diffusion in the lattice and can be described by the fixed second law of diffusion. According to our results, the diffusivities estimated by this model are reduced at least two orders of magnitude for the magnetite in the core shell sample. So this means that the core shell morphology can also be exploited to control the chemical reactivity of the magnetite cores, which is quite a promising result for this field. So to sum up, I hope I gave an overview of what we can do by combining magnetic particles with photoresponsive molecules in polymer assemblies, on the importance of understanding the multiple heating mechanisms in these core shell nanoparticles, and I hope I have shown the potential role of core shell structures to control the chemical transformation of magnetite. So let me now thank my collaborators from the different groups and institutions from Argentina, Brazil, and the US, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Gabriel, for that very nice talk. I don't know if anyone has a question. Here's one in the chat. Can you suggest some techniques for measuring the interfacial magnetic anisotropy and interfacial thickness of core shell particles?
Yeah. So to measure the thickness of the core shell particles, the obvious technique is TEM, because in the electron microscope you have the possibility to have sensitivity to composition, to diffraction, and with very high spatial resolution. And to measure the magnetic anisotropy, well, here when we measure typically the magnetization in DC measurements, for example, we have an overall picture of the sample, so we have to have some other data to differentiate the results from the core and from the shell, or the parameters from core and shell. But it is also possible to go to other techniques to have also surface sensitivity. For example, XMCD. With XMCD, you can have magnetic parameters with surface sensitivity and sufficient spatial resolution to have information directly from the shell. I don't know if this answers your question.
I think it was a very good answer. I don't know if the person, yeah. Yes, she said thank you. We have another one. Are the core shell nanoparticles biocompatible? If not, what shell can prevent oxidation while keeping the biocompatibility? Okay, so at least iron oxide nanoparticles, magnetite and maghemite have been approved by the FDA, for example,
these products that I showed at the beginning of the talk have been approved for different polymer coatings. So other options to use in the shell maybe are silica coatings, but silica coating has the problem that maybe it's difficult to control the porosity for these thin shells. So yes, it is a matter of, it is important to control both the oxidation degree while preserving the biocompatibility. You can also try to, for example, to use a ferrite shell, as in our case, without cobalt, to have a biocompatible shell, and this will be an intermediate solution.
Sure. Alberto has a question also. Alberto, I think you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. If I may, this might be, a completely crazy question, so let me know if it's stupid. But I heard some ideas of using multiferroics for drug deliveries, so like having these little engines. And I was just wondering if this type of shell particles could be combined with multiferroics.
I really don't know about this, so but maybe it can be. I really don't know, but yes, there are a lot of opportunities to, let's say, there are a lot of materials that have been proposed. The thing is that in my case, at least in this kind of studies, you are always set by a series of constraints that are not necessarily due to the material's properties, but are due to biocompatibility or to the possibility of
Right.
chemical synthesis to achieve a material, or to colloidal stability. So there are a lot of things that you have to fulfill together. And sometimes it's difficult to have a material that is biocompatible, but with certain physical properties.
Right.
But sure, it is possible.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gabriel. I would have a few questions myself, but I think I will find you later on GatherTown because we're running out of time. So thanks again.
Thank you, Patricia.